Thank you. Please be seated. Ms. LaViolette, please take the stand.
Please stand for the jury.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, juror number 5 is in the courtroom to observe as a member of the public. I want to remind you of the admonition. It continues to apply, and you should have no contact with juror number 5 until the trial is over. You may continue.
Thank you, Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell us what character assassination is?
Yes, character assassination when you're dealing with domestic violence is deeper than name calling. It's really about tearing somebody's heart and soul apart. It's about taking apart their integrity. It's about pulling their character down. It's more than name calling. It's more than just a verbal sort of assault on somebody. It's an assault on the character of that human being, and it's usually much more debilitating and much more harmful to people.
And when somebody engages in character assassination, is this something that you see from all of the men in your groups who have been abusive?
No, it isn't. Character assassination, if you were looking at the continuum that we showed the other day, character assassination doesn't occur with people in general who are low-level abusive. When people are low-level abusive, they might call out a swear word at you, they might call you a name, but they don't spend the time to tear who you are apart. And that tends to be someone who's more on a higher end of, if you're looking at a continuum of abuse, on a higher end of that continuum.
Okay, and I'm showing you what's in evidence as Exhibit 558. This was your continuum that we talked about. And we see, in the middle we see abuse, right?
Right.
And there we see name calling but not character assassination.
Correct.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
So character assassination takes it one step further?
Yes, it does. At least one step, depending on the degree and depending on the context of other things that are happening.
Okay. Is it a more severe form of abuse?
Yes, it is.
I guess the name calling.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about a text conversation, a tirade really, from May 26, 2008, okay?
Yes.
Sustained.
Have you reviewed the text messages between Mr. Alexander and Ms. Arias on May 26th of 2008?
Yes, I have.
How would you characterize them?
As a tirade, a rant.
From whom?
From Mr. Alexander to Miss Arias.
Okay. Well, first, let's see. We'll start with and again, we know that the time is 7 hours difference, but let's look at the difference in time. We see it starts at May 26th of 2008 at 3:21. You see that? Is that a yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Sorry.
And do you have an understanding of what this conversation is about after speaking with Ms. Arias?
I remember that she was talking to Mr. Alexander about. No, actually, I don't remember the context of it.
Okay. All right. Let's go to this long text message right here. And this is outgoing. So in other words, it's coming from Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
And prior to this, we have the text messages where Miss Arias is trying to tell him something, and she's telling him that she doesn't want to leave it on his voicemail for him. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. But that she wants to tell him something. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right. And then you see Mr. Alexander is responding that he sent a response to her dire conversation, and he hopes that she reads it because she needs to.
Yes.
And he goes on to say that maybe it will spark human emotion in you, something that only seems to exist when it comes to your own problems.
Yes.
And he continues that everyone else is just a part of her sick agenda. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then he talks about that how she makes a comment on a picture of someone else, and that her comment makes her look like a pure whore.
Yes.
And you see where he tells her that you should be embarrassed by her comment.
Yes.
And that if that person knew what Mr. Alexander knew about her, he'd spit in her face.
Yes.
And he tells her that so would everyone else.
Yes.
And does he talk about how he's never been hurt so bad by someone?
Yes.
But that she doesn't care because it doesn't serve her evilness.
Yes.
Do you see in these text messages, are you starting to see anything like character assassination?
Yes, indeed I am.
Okay, can you tell us why this is character assassination versus name calling?
Because he's talking about her as less than human, because he's calling her a pure whore, or you look like a pure whore, which is like calling somebody a pure whore. He's talking about spitting, people spitting in her face. He's calling her evil.
Those are things that are worse than just name calling?
Yes, I think they're worse than just name calling, and because not only are they name calling, but they're all together. It's not like he's picked one thing to call her. It's like he's picking a group of things to tear apart her character.
Okay. And he continues to tell her that she couldn't get off her lazy butt to read what he had written to her.
Yes.
And he calls her a sociopath.
Yes, he does.
And he tells her that he doesn't want her apology.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yes.
But he wants her to understand how evil he thinks she is.
Yes.
And he tells her that you are the worst thing that has ever happened to me. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then he continues. He continues to call her a sociopath.
He does.
And does he tell her that she only cries for herself?
Yes.
And that he thinks that she's never really cared about him?
Yes.
And that she's betrayed him?
Indeed.
And we see her response, right? At the incoming right here?
Yes.
So after this long rant of continuous text messages from Mr. Alexander to Miss Arias with this character assassination, what do you make of her response?
That she didn't see it, and that she hasn't seen it, and she would wants him to
get on the expertise of
overruled.
Does she see? She's talking about that she doesn't have the email that he wanted her to see, right?
Right.
Is she responding in any kind of violent manner back to what all the terrible things he just said?
No.
And is she in any way showing any type of anger towards him?
No, she isn't.
Is it your understanding that after this text message conversation, that the two of them, Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias, then moved on to instant messaging?
Yes.
And have you reviewed that instant message?
Yes, I have.
It's rather long, right?
It's very long.
And actually, before we go to that, let me, again with Exhibit 450, the beginning of the May 26 text starts, we look at the time, and we're just checking for time differences. It starts at 3:21. You see that?
Yes.
And we see it ends at 9:17.
Right.
So about 6 hours?
Uh-huh.
Is that yes?
Yes.
So 6 hours where this Mr. Alexander is continuing with this character assassination.
Yes.
But it doesn't stop, right? Because then, have you read through these instant messages?
Yes, I have.
And with regard to the instant message conversation that they then continue to have, does he continue with this character assassination?
Yes, he continues with it.
And is this something that you are now seeing that is worse than what you've seen before in his other tirades?
Yes, there's an escalation.
And an escalation of what?
An escalation in the names that he calls her, an escalation in what appears to be the intensity, and that he keeps going. He goes on longer. There are more names in that instant message. There are some worse names in that instant message.
What about, you said that he keeps going. What does that mean to you?
It takes a lot of energy to go on and on and on and keep that rage going. It's like an uncontrolled kind of rage. It's like a rage that just keeps feeding itself. And it would be very scary to be on the other side of that kind of rage, to be in the room with somebody who is going on like that. Most of the people I work with, although they might name call, they usually are not going on at that level in terms of what they say to somebody and how long they say it.
All right. What about if you have an argument that, in this particular, just talking about the text messages, if you have an argument that lasts 5 hours, is that unusual to have an argument lasting 5 hours?
No. And in fact, they were younger at that time, and I think that most people can remember arguments they had in their 20s that are probably a lot different than the arguments they have when they're older. They have more life experience. Maybe they take things a little less personally. But when you're in your 20s and early 30s, a 5-hour argument isn't that long an argument. It's what's contained in the argument that's concerning to me, not just the length of the argument.
Okay. So, and when you talk about what's contained in the argument, what specifically do you mean?
The kind of language, the kind of derogation of somebody's character, the choice of words. I have rarely heard words strung together in the way they are strung together in this instant message.
All right. Judge, may I approach?
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 275.
Objection. Witness doesn't indicate she doesn't call it and doesn't need it, have a need for it. No question for her either.
Sustained.
Ms. LaViolette, have you reviewed the instant message?
I have
May
reviewed
10th?
the instant message.
And page-wise, is it over 5 or 6? Well, it's over 6 or 7 pages.
Yes, it's 16 pages.
Okay. Is that something that you can remember without looking, or do you need help to look? Do you need help do you need to review it to remember the exact words that are being said?
I need to review it.
Okay. When we talk about and we're talking about the character assassination that's going on in this particular instance, is it important to you what the specific words that Mr. Alexander is using?
Yes.
Do the specific words make a difference to you whether or not you would consider them name-calling versus character assassination?
Yes, they do. The specific words are important.
Okay. Based on that information, can you tell us, give us an example of some of the character assassination that you see going on in this instant message?
What a freaking whore.
Objection. She's reading from the exhibit.
Sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.
All right. What I'm going to ask you to do is not read from it. So if you want to look at it and then tell us, if you need to review it to remember what the words are, and then tell us what it is. Okay?
Yes,
Okay.
I will.
All right. So can you give us another example of where you see character assassination?
In calling her a cheap whore,
Okay. And another one?
calling her a corrupted carcass. I don't know how a heart beats in such a corrupted carcass.
And another one?
Hitler had more of a conscience than you.
And another one?
I don't even know if you...
She keeps reading from it.
Sustained.
Ms. LaViolette, are you reading or are you reviewing and then telling us?
I'm reviewing and telling you.
Okay. May she continue?
Yes.
Thank you.
I've never dealt with a more solid form of evil. Calling her evil...
Objection. She review it. I'm asking she at least close it.
Yes.
Judge, may we approach?
Just look at it and then look up and you may repeat what you've read, if it will refresh your recollection. All right.
For the record, Judge, that's what she's doing.
Well, I just looked over and saw that she was looking down when she was speaking. You may continue.
He accuses her of being going on to the next dick.
And another one?
He tells her words are worthless. He hates her. She's caused him more pain than the death of his father. She's a rotten lunatic. He's never dealt with a more solid form of evil. She's nothing but a liar. She lives a life identical to Satan. She's a three-hole wonder. She ought to get tips for giving BJs. She never loved him. She's got a slut's job. Who freaking cares about you? You're worthless. You're a bitch. Your lies make your life worthless. You're taking up people's air. You don't care. You don't know what horror you've caused me. You're a laughingstock. You don't care about anything but Jodi. He blames her for a lot of the pain he feels in his own life. He tells her that he was nothing more than a dildo with a heartbeat to her. You're demented. Goes on.
Are there more examples of character assassination?
Some repeats of the same kinds of things, some talking about her values, but basically more of the same and calling her some repeated names. But it goes on for 16 pages. Not all of them are name calling, but they certainly are tearing her character apart.
All right. And this is something, and I understand you're not familiar so much with the emails and the difference between them, but you can tell that this is something that is being typed out between the parties, right?
Yes.
So every time Mr. Alexander wants to say something, he's going to be typing it.
Yes.
And you say in this, when you talk about 16 pages, is this something that is single-spaced?
It is single-spaced.
We talked about the length of the text message tirade lasting over 5 hours. Do you have any idea of the length of this instant message conversation?
I don't know when it started. No, I don't know how long. I just know that it's single-spaced, 16 pages.
What about his mother with regard to verbal abuse?
Objection, the out of court's order, hearsay.
Approach, counsel.
Okay, Ms. Lilet, in reading the writings that Mr. Alexander wrote,
yes.
Okay, did he talk about having to suffer as a child from verbal abuse?
Yes, he did.
And did he talk about suffering as a child from verbal abuse at the hands of his own mother?
Yes, he did.
And did he talk about the severity of this verbal abuse by his mother?
Yes, he did, absolutely.
And when we talk about severity, was it severe verbal abuse?
It was very severe verbal abuse.
And is that important to you in trying to then assess the relationship or what he's writing and saying to Miss Arias?
Yes, there's a direct link when you look at role modeling and what you learn in families of origin. In addition to that, the only consistent risk marker when you look at people growing up or people who become perpetrators of domestic violence, the only consistent risk marker is that they have been exposed to domestic violence it could be their family of origin or the family that raised them, but there's exposure to that because children learn a lot from the people that raised them.
And unless they get some type of help or counseling for that, is it difficult for them to learn another way?
It's very difficult for them to learn another way. You don't expect somebody who grows up in a Spanish-speaking family and that's monolingual to speak fluent English. And I don't expect somebody who grows up in an abusive family to just know how to speak the language of mental health without some help. And that can come from other people, but generally speaking, almost 100% of the people that I work with have come from families where they were either direct recipients of abuse or they were exposed to it.
In this particular instant messaging conversation, at some point, does Ms. Arias talk about the sexual contact that they've had over their relationship?
Yes, she does.
Do you need to review it?
I basically know what she says.
Okay.
Depending on what you're referring to, I know some of the things she said.
Okay. Well, if you need to refer, just refer to the exhibit. Let me know, okay?
All right.
All right. So does she talk about why their sexual contact was important to her, what she got from it?
Yes, she does.
And generally speaking, what is it that she says?
She basically says that for her, the sex made the relationship seem more special. Maybe she was blind to that, but that it made her feel more special, and that the more that she complied or went along with what he wanted to do, the more that they were sexual and the more satisfactory that sex was, the more he wanted her and the more time they had together, and the closer she felt.
And so is she talking about the closeness that she enjoyed?
Yes.
And the time that they would spend together?
Yes.
In your practice and your experience, is there a difference between men and women on how we view sex and love?
There's a saying that, and I don't mean to offend any of the men who don't feel this way. There's a saying that men give sex to get love, and men give love to get sex, and women give sex to get love. And that's not always true, but sexuality tends to mean different things, and oftentimes for women, it's the cuddling, it's the kissing, it's the foreplay, but oftentimes for men, it's the sexual act itself that encompasses that. So there's a different way of looking at sexuality, I think, in general.
And in your practice, have you found in your experience that men and women are judged differently based on their sexual activities?
Yes. Oftentimes when women are acting out in a sexual way, they're seen as sluts. There's a lot of names attached to that. When men are acting out sexually, it's often seen as that they're more of a stud, or that it's a more positive thing than when women are acting out sexually. And I think that things have changed to some degree, but I think there's still that overall belief that women who are acting out in a sexual way are seen more negatively.
By society, you mean?
By society in general, yeah.
All right. After May 26th, when we have these tirades, there's some journal entries from Ms. Arias. And have you reviewed the journal entries from May 26th to May 30th from Ms. Arias?
Yes, I have.
All right, I'm showing you Exhibit 592. What's been marked is 592.
And I know it starts with May 24th, but I turned the page to May 26th, okay?
Yes.
All right. So on May 26th, we have writings from Ms. Arias, and this would be around the same time that we just read through these tirades that are happening, right?
Yes.
Does Ms. Arias talk about this communication that she just had with Mr. Alexander?
Objection. Again, the witness hasn't indicated she doesn't remember.
Restate your question.
In the journal entry, does Ms. Arias talk about whether or not these communications that she just had with Mr. Alexander?
Her recollection hasn't been, doesn't need to be refreshed.
Overruled. You may answer.
All right. Yes,
Okay.
she does talk about it, and she calls it classic rude.
Sustained.
All right. So when we're talking, we just read through all this character assassination and the terrible names that he calls her. In her journal, does she write about it?
Yes, she does.
All right. And when she writes about it in her journal, does she characterize or does she minimize what just happened?
Yes, she does.
And does she minimize these conversations that she just had with Mr. Alexander in a way that basically, does she give it very much detail about it?
As to the time that these were written.
Overruled.
Does she give much detail about...
No, she doesn't. She doesn't give detail. She just says classic rude.
All right, so does she talk about then, minimizing in other words, she doesn't put any of these horrible names in her journal?
She doesn't, and that's part of the promise from earlier.
Sustained.
Is that part of the promise that she makes to Mr. Alexander earlier not to write about negative things about him?
Speculation as to why she didn't write it.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, she's made a promise to him that she won't write specific things in her journal, and she's keeping that promise.
Does she actually refer to these tirades as one of her cycles?
Overruled.
She talks about a pattern.
Yes or no?
It's not beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
She talks about a pattern where he gets pissed off, and then they make up. He goes off on her, he gets pissed off, he goes off on her, and then they make up.
And so is she talking, in the sense, is she getting a sense of this pattern? Does she understand that there's a pattern now?
She does understand there's a pattern.
And when she talks about this pattern, can you see an increase or an escalation in this pattern, how often it happens?
Do I see an increase?
Well, what she writes about. Does she talk about timing of the pattern? And if you need to refresh your recollection, go ahead.
She talks about things being mellow.
Sustained.
How does she talk about it as a pattern?
She talks about it happening every few days.
Okay. And so...
Or every few days there's a good period of time, and then there's another blow-up.
Okay. And so is that an escalation? Are you seeing an escalation in the pattern of the blow-ups and then back down?
Yes.
And are you seeing that, besides just looking at her journal, are you seeing that on your own through the text messages?
I'm seeing that on my own through the text messages, and I'm seeing that on my own in regard to physical incidents as well.
Okay. In this journal entry, does she compare Mr. Alexander to her own father?
She does.
And how does she compare the two?
She compares them as similar in their athleticism, in their physiques, in that they're both opinionated, that they're both Republican, and then she says, and they both make rude statements, and then find ways to make up for it.
I'm looking at page 377 in case you need to refresh. Does she talk about specific...
The witness is reading. There isn't the question before her.
I just directed her to page 377.
Overruled.
Okay?
Yes.
All right. So is there a point in this journal entry where she talks about their 2-hour chat?
Yes.
And when she's talking about chatting, is she talking, can you tell from the context of this entry, is she talking about this instant messaging chatting that she just did?
It sounds like it. She says we had a 2-hour chat, and I let him get it out of his system.
All right. So does she then talk about how she reacts to his tirades by letting him get it out of her system, his system?
That's what she says, that she lets him get it out of his system.
And is that part of the pattern that she sees that she's talking about earlier?
Yes.
All right, I'm talking, on May 27th, she has another journal entry, and I'm talking about page 379. Do you need to refresh your recollection?
No, I know that.
All right. Is she talking about meeting somebody named Ryan Burns?
Yes, she is.
And is she talking about taking a trip to go see him?
She's talking about taking a trip to Utah to go see Ryan Burns.
Is this evidence of her actual behavioral evidence of her moving on?
Yes.
And in her entry, does she sound excited about it?
She says great news, so she's excited that they've texted each other.
All right, and throughout this journal entry, is she talking about making plans to, on this trip, to go to Utah?
Yes, she is.
All right. On May 30th, I'm on page 381. Let me know if you need to refresh your recollection.
Yes.
Okay.
I've recollected.
Okay. And as of May 30th, 2008, is she making a full plan now to go to Utah? Does she know when she's going?
She's going the following week. She's excited because she's going to spend a couple days with Ryan, but she's also hoping to hit some national parks along the way.
And now on to June 1st, page 383. Is she just generally speaking about what her itinerary is?
Yes, and she's talking about visiting Daryl, her ex-boyfriend, and Matt, her ex-boyfriend, and Daryl and his son Jack. She's looking forward to visiting them and saying she's definitely going to visit them, definitely going to visit Matt.
And incidentally, is she still friendly with both of her ex-boyfriends, Mr. Brewer and Mr. McCartney?
She is friendly with both of them.
And later in this journal entry on June 1st, does she talk about, and I'm on page 385 if you need. Do you need to review that?
Yes, no.
Okay. All right. Later in this journal entry on June 1st, is she talking about bringing up the trip to Utah to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she is.
And that she and Mr. Alexander have a conversation about her trip to Utah?
Yes, they do.
And how did Mr. Alexander take the news that she was going to Utah?
She says he's not that thrilled about it.
I didn't hear. Okay, I'm sorry. What did you say?
She says he's not very thrilled about her taking the trip to Utah.
That he's not thrilled? Is that what
That
you said?
he's not thrilled, yes.
Is she trying to, does she want to tell him that she's going to visit another man?
No, she doesn't. In fact, she's talked to the friend that introduced her and asked him not to say anything.
To Mr. Alexander?
Yes, not to say anything. She said she doesn't want to hurt Mr. Alexander.
And on page 389. Let me know if you need to refresh. And this is all part of the June 1st entry, right?
Yes. Okay.
Is she talking further about her conversation with Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she is.
And is Mr. Alexander guilting her about coming to see him?
Yes.
And does she talk about how she handles that?
Yes, she does. She says that she stood her ground, and she said if it wasn't for looking forward to seeing Ryan Burns, that she might not have been able to stand her ground, but that helped her to be able to stand her ground.
And by stand her ground, she's doing what?
By standing her ground, she's saying that she's not going to Arizona, she's not going to Mesa, she's going to take the trip she had originally intended to take.
Okay, so is she able to say no to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she is.
And on page 390, does she talk about how he took that news?
She says that he sounded bothered by it.
Okay. And this was June 1st, is that right?
Yes. She also reminded him he was going to be visiting her soon.
Are you aware of the fact that they had plans that he was going to be coming up to California to visit her?
Yes.
And is that what she was reminding him of?
Yes.
And when she had the conversation with him about not being physical anymore, was part of that conversation that they weren't going to be physical when he comes to see her in California?
I believe they were going to be physical. I believe they had a plan
To
there
be
was a
phys-
place in the woods.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So is this something that you see then that she is continuing to struggle with?
Yes.
All right. And then just generally speaking, text messages between the two of them from May 30th to June 2nd, are they just general conversation type text messages?
Yeah, they're very conversational.
Okay. Nothing mean about them?
No.
Now, I want to talk to you about the timing of communications from Mr. Alexander to numerous other women, okay?
All right.
And I want to specifically just narrow it down to a timeline of around December 2007 up to June of 2008, okay?
All right.
And it's not to say that there weren't communications with other women by Mr. Alexander prior to December of 7. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. But for our purposes, let's narrow it down.
All right.
Okay. Have you reviewed communications between Mr. Alexander and other women during this time period?
Yes, I have.
And in your review of these communications, do you find them important to your assessment about the relationship between Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias?
I find them important regarding the deception and
The deception by whom?
by Mr. Alexander, the ongoing deception.
Okay.
I find them significant for those reasons.
All right.
For that reason.
And do you find it addressing any type of a pattern in the way that he treats other women?
Yes, I do.
And when the communications that you reviewed between December and June, when do most of these communications take place as far as time of the day?
They happen late at night, sometimes in the middle of the night. So they tend to happen late in the evening.
Okay, and not all of them, is that right?
No, not all of them.
But are you talking about most of his communications with other women are in the middle of the night?
Yes, and in fact, some of the women complain about it.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of these. Do you know a woman, or are you familiar with a woman named Denise?
Yes.
And did you review communications between Mr. Alexander and Denise?
Yes, I did.
What type of woman was Denise?
Objection, hearsay, Becker Foundation.
Sustained.
Well, Judge, may we approach?
May continue.
All right, Ms. Violet, in reviewing your communications between Mr. Alexander and this woman named Denise, does she, in your opinion, seem to be in a vulnerable position?
Yes.
And that's based on some of the things that she says about herself.
Yes, it is.
And the communications bit with Mr. Alexander, is he Is he flirtatious with her?
Yes.
And does he make sexual innuendos?
He asked for,
Objection. Hearsay. Yes or no?
yes.
Sustained.
You can wait for the judge to rule.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Okay. I get excited.
All right. Let's talk about a woman named Nicole. Are you familiar with communications between Mr. Alexander and a woman named Nicole?
Yes, I am.
And did was Nicole already in another relationship during these communications?
Yes, she was.
Overruled. You may answer yes or no.
Yes.
And during some of these conversations, is Mr. Alexander insulting her about her relationship?
Yes. Yes, he is.
In other conversations, is he being flirtatious with her?
Yes, he has been flirtatious with her.
And we've heard from about a woman named Lisa that he was dating from 2007 to 2008, right?
Yes.
Did you review communications between them as well?
Yes, I did.
And are you aware of their age difference?
They were 10 to 11 years different.
Okay, was Lisa younger than he was?
Yes, Lisa was 10 to 11 years younger than he was.
All right. And we went through an email from Miss Andrews already where she was complaining about how sexual he was with her. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Deanna, are you familiar with communications between Mr. Alexander and Deanna?
Yes, I am.
And do you know who Deanna is?
Yes.
Is she a longtime girlfriend of Mr. Alexander?
Yes, yes, she was.
Okay. And at this time in December from December to June of 2008, is he still in contact with her?
Yes, he is.
And did you review communications between Mr. Alexander and a woman named Chriselle?
Yes, I did.
And was this woman in a particularly vulnerable position?
Yes, she was.
And that's based on your review of the things that she said about herself?
Yes.
And in their communications, did they have graphic sexual content?
Yes, they did.
And was Mr. Alexander, in reviewing the communications, is it Mr. Alexander who's also is speaking in sexually graphic ways?
Yes, he is.
Are you familiar with communications between Mr. Alexander and a woman named Reagan?
Yes, I am.
And in these communications, is there also is Mr. Alexander being flirtatious?
Yes, he is.
Is he asking her for pictures?
Yes, he does.
And close to naked pictures?
Yes, he does.
And in particular, do you remember reviewing a communication between Mr. Alexander and this woman named Reagan where he complains about having...
Objection. Hearsay in the leading nature question.
Finish the question, please.
Where he complains about having an ex-girlfriend stalking him?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Jury will disregard the response. Counsel approach. You may continue.
In one of the conversations that you reviewed between Mr. Alexander and this woman named Reagan, did he complain that he had a stalker?
Yes, he did.
And incidentally, did he make this complaint timing-wise 3 days after he had phone sex with Miss Arias?
Yes, he did.
And about 2 days after, he was sending Miss Arias lovely text messages?
Yes.
Did you review communications between Mr. Alexander and a woman named Shatanya?
Yes, I did.
And, I forgot to ask you, with the woman named Reagan, did she have any issues such that it put her in a vulnerable position?
Yes.
And you know that based on the things that she said about herself?
Yes.
All right, this woman named Shatanya, based on the things that she said about herself, was she in a vulnerable position?
She was vulnerable.
Okay. And she was not LDS, is that right?
No, she wasn't.
During the conversations between Mr. Alexander and Chaitanya, at some point in your review, at some point, did he give her the Book of Mormon?
Yes, he did.
And at some point, did he challenge her to read it?
Yes, he did.
Is that similar to what he did with Miss Arias when he met her?
Exactly.
And talking in their conversations, was there talk, graphically sexual talk in their conversations?
Yes.
And in fact, in one of their conversations, does Mr.
Hearsay in the question.
I didn't ask.
You may continue.
In one of their conversations, does Mr. Alexander, does he talk about having his head between her legs?
Yes, he does.
And he's not wishing it. Is he talking about something occurred in the past?
He's talking about something that occurred.
Their conversations in late May. Let's talk about those a little bit, okay?
All right.
Is there a point in time when Mr. Alexander, as you read these conversations, was being manipulative with Chaitanya?
Yes, he was.
And in what way is that? Generally speaking, of course.
He alluded to suicide because she wouldn't come over
Okay.
to visit.
And does this conversation go on? Does this conversation go on for a little while, where he's talking about suicide?
He talks about suicide maybe 3 times or so.
All right. And ultimately, does this woman say no to him? She doesn't have the time to come over.
She does.
And after all of that, what is his response?
He
Rephrase the question, sustained.
Not his exact response, but what does he do?
He IMs her. I think these are IMs. I don't know if they're IMs or texts.
Okay.
But whatever, he continues with that, and she stops communicating with him.
Okay. And is he still trying to contact her without her contacting him back?
Yes.
And that during this time period for Mr. Alexander, he had, in March, lost Lisa Andrews. Is that right?
Yes.
And
Broke
in
up.
April, he had lost Miss Arias.
Yes. Not completely, but he had.
He lost her
physical
physically,
presence.
right?
Yes.
And in reviewing his journal entries, was he still pining for Miss Andrews?
I believe he was, yes. He was missing Miss Andrews.
Missing Miss Andrews, okay. Did you review messages or communications between Mr. Alexander and a woman named Maria?
Yes, I did.
And Maria was LDS, is that right?
Yes, she was.
But despite that, did he have sexual talk with her?
Yes, he did.
And did he talk about sneaking her out of his grandma's house?
Yes.
Said yes?
Yes.
And is that something that he did with Miss Arias?
Yes.
Conversations with Maria, do you see him pushing sexual boundaries with her?
Yes, he does.
Do you see him, in these conversations, do you see him trying to go as far as he can?
He's asking her how far they could go before they'd have to go see the bishop.
Okay, and how does he do that? Does he give her examples?
He does give her examples. He gives her examples of what he called...
Does he give her examples?
Yes.
Okay. And does he get to a point where it's too graphic for her?
Yes, he gets to a point where she doesn't want to talk anymore about it.
Okay. In reviewing these communications between Mr. Alexander and these women, what is it that you learn from it? As far as as far as your assessment with this relationship and Mr. Alexander?
One of the things I see as a pattern in the way he connects with women, and in general goes after women that are younger than him or in a vulnerable place. He also pushes sexual boundaries. He sort of throws comments out to see how far he can go. There's just a pattern in the way he treats women in a very sexual way, very sexualized way. Although he has other conversations with them as well, he sexualizes them. He doesn't tend to have long relationships. Most of these relationships are over the internet or texting or that sort of thing. There are a few that are also in person, several that he's met with in person, but they're not long-term, they're not connected, they don't seem to be close relationships. And in several of the relationships, he is trying to encourage the women to join PPL, his business, or to give him a couple of leads.
Okay. Does he, in these conversations, does he put himself out there as a virgin?
Yes, he does. He consistently puts himself out as a virgin.
Given the timing of when all of this is happening in late spring of 2008, do you see any indications of desperation from Mr. Alexander? He seems to be, particularly with women who pull away, he seems to be more desperate in his relationship with Jodi Arias because there's an escalation in his verbal abuse and his physical abuse. When Chaitanya pulls away, he emails her to try to get in touch with him. The other women that he's in contact with continue to be in contact with him, so I don't see it there. Okay, so so you see the desperation when the woman is pulling away from him?
Yes.
And do you see that with regard to Lisa Andrews?
I saw that in regard to Lisa Andrews, that when they would break up, he was continually, trying to make up with her, and they would make up. But when they eventually talked about engagement, the relationship ended. Ms. Andrews said it was mutual because his financial situation wouldn't allow him to support her. But that was when that relationship began to pull apart.
Okay.
For the last time.
For the last time. All right.
May I take a break?
Yes, we're in some break, so we'll take our recess at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please be back in the jury room at 10 minutes after 3. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. The record will show the jury has left the courtroom. You may step down, Ms. LaViolette. Counsel, I'd like to see you at the bench, please.